All right. I think we're live. If I could have someone just confirm whether this is working or not, that would be much appreciated. Just to check that all the technicalities are going through. Yeah, excellent. That's awesome. Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to another Earth Live lesson. I hope you've been enjoying the series. It's been absolutely fantastic. I have to have a massive thanks to Lizzie Daly for setting all of this up, and for inviting me on to give a short lesson. So before I get on into this talk, I am just going to play a short recording of the main subject that we're going to be focusing on in this lesson. And whilst I give a short intro, I want you guys to guess. I know some of you already know what it is, so it's probably not going to be much of a teaser. How weird is that? Right, get your guesses in. What makes that noise? We'll come back to that in a minute. So yeah, welcome everyone. My name is Ben Porter. I'm a young wildlife photographer, general nature enthusiast, interested in everything from insects to birds and everything in between, really. I last year graduated from a degree in conservation biology at the University of Exeter, the campus in Cornwall. Although my main interest in wildlife has come from my upbringing on a tiny little island off northwest Wales. So it's quite funny that earlier in the day we've had a talk from Maddie, who's based down on the Gower in South Wales. I am on the other end of Cardigan Bay, waving back on the Llyn Peninsula. But yeah, the place that is going to feature a lot in this is called Bardsey Island. So it's a place that I grew up for half my life. It's this little. It looks really weird inverted on the screen there, but this is Bardsey Island, or Ynys Entlli in Welsh, and it's a tiny little island off the northwest coast of Wales. And it was on here that I really grew in my interest in the natural world and spent all my spare time taking images, learning about the wildlife there, and getting involved with the work of a bird observatory, a place, an establishment that studies birds and other wildlife. Now, I was educated here through my GCSEs and A levels at home, homeschooled, and resources such as this on YouTube were a massive asset. So it's a funny little circle, but it's great to be able to contribute to something going on during a time when a lot of people will be at home, hopefully studying. So I hope this is interesting and of use. Now, the species, the general group of species that I'm going to be talking about are those called seabirds. Now, Maddie has touched briefly on these earlier today, and for those that don't know, seabirds are, as it says on the tin, really just birds that spend most of their lives out at sea. So a common species for many that you would know is something like a herring gull, say. And those that Maddie mentioned earlier today, razorbills, guillemots, puffin. Puffin is one that virtually everyone knows. These are all seabirds. And there's a specific group that I'm going to be focusing on today called the tube-nosed seabirds. This is a very old book, a lovely illustration guide. And this group of seabirds, as you can see in this double-page spread here, the tube-nosed swimmers. This is quite a few years old now, this book, but nevertheless features a lot of them. So a lot of you will know about this one, the wandering albatross. Absolutely awesome bird. But this is quite closely related to the species I'm going to be talking about today. And they're all of these species have a very unique and common feature to them that makes them a tube-nosed seabird. And you might be able to see on this piece of paper here, there's a couple of representations here. So this little chap here is a storm petrel chick. So I've recently been working on these little guys out in the Azores in the mid-Atlantic. And you can see on its little beak here, it's got a tiny little projection on the top of its bill, as has this brute here, which is a southern giant petrel. It's about the size of an albatross, but in the southern hemisphere, you tend to get these. They look pretty fierce, and they are. Probably take your finger off. These little cute chaps are a world away, but they're still in the same general group. Now, this feature on the nose there, on the beak rather, is involved in a really cool function of these species in their ability to essentially get all of their water that they need from seawater, because they spend most of their lives at sea. They don't really have access to fresh water, so they actually drink seawater and excrete the salty solution, this really concentrated solution of salt, through this tube, because it's connected to a gland at the base of their bill, sort of in their forehead, that essentially filters out the salt and is excreted through this beak. So sometimes when you see some of these birds flying around out at sea, they have a little sort of damp globule on the end of their beak, which is the salt solution just dripping off the tip of their beak. It's really cool, amazing birds, and they're very close to my heart because of where I was brought up in North Wales. So I'm going to come back to this recording. I'm going to play it again. It's a crazy sound, that. And yes, who has guessed right? So Robin Edwards, well done. It is, and Maddie, yes, excellent. So it's a Manx shearwater. It's the call of a Manx shearwater. It's a bizarre call. So for a moment here, I just want you to picture yourself in the 16th, 17th century, if you will, on a sailing ship off the west coast of Wales in the middle of the Irish Sea. And it's the darkest of nights, and you're going past some remote islands, and all you can hear suddenly is this sound echoing in the air. You have absolutely no idea what on earth it is. What are you going to do? Yeah, so early sailors, when passing islands such as Bardsey Island, where you find these birds, thought these places were haunted by ghosts because of that sound. And it's easy to see why, really. It's a bizarre sound, and they didn't realize that it's in fact a population, a colony of these seabirds called the Manx shearwater. Now, their name comes from where one of the original colonies in the UK was sort of discovered, really, on the Isle of Man, on the Calf of Man, somewhere called Manx. Now, unfortunately, the population there went extinct because of the impact of rats eating their eggs and chicks. Eventually, they went extinct there. But thankfully, they're still found in some of the coolest places of the UK, in my opinion. So I've got a map here. It looks really weird reversed screen. You might recognize this as the UK. It's a little bit tricky like this, but I've tried to circle where some of the biggest colonies, a population, a group of these seabirds that breed are. So we have Lundy off the Devon coast. We have Skoma and Skokan off the South Wales coast, along with Ramsey Island. Then we have Bardsey, which is where I'll be talking about them, which is just here. And then we have the Isle of Rum up in Western Scotland. So the Manx shearwater, there's about between 340,000 and 400,000 individuals, or rather breeding pairs, known worldwide. And in the UK, we've got virtually all of them, to be honest, about 80%. We've got about 300,000 pairs that are known around the UK coast. And this species breeds more or less only on inaccessible islands offshore. And of the ones that breed in the UK, Wales has about half of them. So if ever there's going to be a national bird of Wales, I think it should probably be the Manx shearwater. Close with the chough, but I think the Manx shearwater should be the national bird of Wales, to be honest. So Bardsey, where I grew up, this island here, we have about 22,000 pairs of these amazing seabirds that nest on this island. Now, the seabird is mostly restricted to breeding on these offshore islands, such as Skoma and Skocum off South Wales and Rum in Scotland, because there aren't predators that would eat their chicks and eggs and things during the breeding season. So they're really safe places for these species to nest. So Manx shearwaters, I'm just going to give a few brief facts about these amazing birds. I could probably spend hours talking about. Oh, by the way, if you have any questions or anything during the talk, please put them in the comments and I'll try and leave a few minutes at the end to cover them. So the Manx shearwater, some of you I'm sure will have heard of these, but for those that haven't, it's a medium-sized tube-nosed seabird. So one of these seabirds that I just mentioned. Now, I was going to show you a skull of these also to illustrate the tube nose. You would not believe it. Just before doing this tour, I went out to get the skull that had been drying on the wall outside, and the dog had eaten it. Yeah, so that's not going to happen. I wanted to give a rough approximation of the size of a Manx shearwater, which is about pigeon-sized, or like this duck. It's roughly that sort of size. None of the other features correspond to this duck, but it's about that sort of size. Unfortunately, I don't have a skull to show you anymore. But they're about a pigeon-sized seabird. They've got this amazing bill, really hooked bill for catching fish, and these serrations on the inside of their bill which point backwards and allow it to eat really slippery fish, a bit like puffins. They also have these, really help to cling onto these fish and allow them to eat them. So Manx shearwaters actually spend their winters off the coast of South America. Argentina, Brazil, places like that in South America. So they overwinter in the South Atlantic Ocean, just off the east coast of South America here. So they migrate all the way from up around the UK and the west coast of some places in Canada, and they migrate all the way down to the coast of South America. It's an amazing migration, and they do this sort of figure of eight. They come down like this, and then they do a sort of circle like that back to the UK. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we'll be having all of these, well, over the last month, a lot of these Manx shearwaters have been returning to their colonies, to their places that they breed all around the UK. And in fact, this morning I saw my first Manx shearwater of the year when I was down on my daily walk looking out to sea, and there one was just over the waves, skimming the waves. So they're called shearwaters because they do indeed shear the water. They're incredibly efficient flyers, like albatrosses. They barely flap their wings. They've got these stiff wings that they just use the wind to really fly long distances with minimal effort. So they just shear along the wind using these updrafts from the waves, and you can see them skimming along the waves. They're incredible creatures, and they can fly massive distances with minimal effort. Really amazing birds. So they spend virtually all their life at sea. They head on down to South America during the winter, returning to their colonies right now, and they nest in burrows underground, a bit like puffins. They nest in burrows underground where they lay their single egg, just one little white egg underground, and they'll incubate that for weeks. So as we speak, they'll be pairing up, they'll be ready, they'll be looking in their burrow, preparing it for the breeding season. Now, they have one egg underground, and after they'll be laying that in sort of May, mid-May to late May, and then by July they will have a tiny little fluffy chick in there that they'll rear. They'll spend the whole of the rest of the summer, both parents, feeding that chick and rearing it up until it's ready to fledge the nest. And during that time, they only visit the colony at night, and that's when you hear this amazing call. Like most other seabirds will be visiting their chicks during the daytime, but Manx shearwaters only come to the colony at night under the cover of darkness. They're able to find their way to their burrows, sometimes by smelling out their burrow, but they also use the stars and the sun for navigation. And they'll find their burrow, find their mate, and they'll lay their egg and then rear the chick through the summer months. And a chick looks a bit like this. This is a cover for my microphone that helps filter out the wind, and it's something that I could find that was very similar to the size and the sort of texture of a fluffy chick when it hatches out. Now, one of the amazing things about Manx shearwaters and generally these tube-nosed seabirds is that they live a long time. They live a long time. So one of the oldest known wild birds was actually a Manx shearwater on Bardsey Island. So it lived to be 55 years old. It was ringed. It had a ring fitted to it, one of these metal rings that are specifically designed so that we can keep track of where birds go, how old they live, and how well they survive. And they have an individually unique number on it. And it was ringed in, I believe, 1953, and it was retrapped in the 2000s. And it was 55 years old. It's incredible. It hasn't been seen since 2008 or before that, I think. But incredible to think that they lived that long. Now, whilst these birds are in the colony, one of the things that we as researchers, as scientists, that really want to find out is where they go at sea, both during their migration period, but also during the time that they're breeding at the colony. And how can you do this? They spend all their lives pretty much at sea. That's where they feed, where they interact with other birds and potentially with threats, and a whole variety of threats, everything from changing sea surface temperatures through to their prey being fished out, overfished in some areas, or plastic pollution. There's so many different things that could impact them. But as a beginning point, we need to know where they go. And how can we do that? Well, one of the ways we can do that is using what are called GPS loggers, a GPS tracker. Now, if you've been watching these series for quite a while, you may have seen a couple of these sort of pieces of technology already being explained and used. So Lucy Hawkes did a brilliant live lesson about loads of different ways that we can find out where animals go, and she touched briefly on these things. So a GPS logger, in a sense, is a device that speaks to satellites, these structures orbiting the Earth, and it allows you to know where this is on the planet. It speaks to the satellites, and one satellite's, oh, I think you're there. The other satellite's, oh, I think you're there. And then it has this position that it gains from speaking to these satellites, and then it stores the information in this logger. And when you get this logger back, you can then see where the bird has been. So it speaks to the satellite at regular intervals. It sends out and gains a signal of where it is, and it stores that information up. So during my time at university with the University of Exeter, I decided for my undergraduate project there, for my research project, I decided to study Manx shearwaters on Bardsey to find out where they were going during the breeding season. And now I used these devices. So this is called a GPS logger. It's just one of many different types you can find. This one is really cheap, only about 40 quid. And you have to strip away all the plastic. This was just designed for people logging their runs and things in parks. And what you do, you put this in a waterproof pouch. You program it. You put it in a waterproof pouch, and then you find a Manx shearwater during the night. Very carefully, you've got to do all this under qualification. And you basically put this logger on the Manx shearwater using some tape on the back of the bird, on the feathers. Then you let the shearwater go. It will go out. It will go on a foraging trip, and then it will come back, and you can get the information off it and find out where it's gone. Now, I know I'm already running out of time, so I'm going to show you some of the tracks, of the GPS tracks of where these Manx shearwaters went from Bardsey. It's pretty amazing. So Bardsey is in the center of all these squiggly lines here. And this is where all the Manx shearwaters that I tracked, 15 or 20 birds, went during that period. So when they were feeding their chick, and during incubation, they take turns at incubating. This is how far they went. It's incredible. This is the Isle of Rum all the way up here. So they probably went to say hello to the colony on Rum. So these are all the tracks of where these birds went. And this is really important because it enables us to see where they're foraging, where they're feeding, finding food, and think about how we can protect these areas if they're facing threats and if they might be depleted. So amazing to be involved with a piece of research like that. And I know I'm getting to the end now, so I'm just going to go through a few of the questions before I finish. Oh, very good question, Mike. Mike Dixon there. How can we get more politicians interested in ecology and promoting conservation? That's a very good question. I think giving politicians hands-on experience and seeing these things themselves, getting them to appreciate the natural world and seeing wildlife and the beauty of it themselves, I think straight away they would understand how important it is to conserve. So maybe creating these opportunities for politicians to actually, come and visit conservation projects, or young naturalists, really trying to promote the natural world might be a place to start. I'd love to take a politician to Bardsey and give them the experience of a Manx shearwater colony. I don't know how they would take to that. What they feed on, great question, Robin Edwards. So Manx shearwaters feed on a whole variety of different fish and squid. In fact, shearwaters in generally, some of them feed at night on bioluminescing squid. So those squid that come to the surface of the sea and give off this bioluminescent light at night. Manx shearwaters will be generally feeding on small fish, things like small herring, out at sea. And I did just find a Corey shearwater skull that I'm just going to show you briefly. So this is a very similar seabird, Corey shearwater, in the Azores. So these guys you find in the mid-Atlantic, but you can see that's a ferocious bill, and that'll be able to get all sorts of fish and things. They can dive a short way under the surface to catch their fish. So they'll sit on the sea surface and they'll just dive short way underneath to capture the fish. I'll go for one more question before I sign off. And yes, Isaac, I will keep the dog away from this skull. Do they ever rest during their migrations? Good question, Isaac. So actually, they will rest when they're out at sea on foraging trips. They'll be going around, they'll be trying to find their prey out at sea. And a lot of this is done through their sense of smell. They can smell patches where primary producers out at sea are being fed on by secondary, by consumers. So phytoplankton being fed on by zooplankton release this odor which waters can pick up on. They've got this highly specialized sense of smell, and whilst they're out feeding, they will take short rests sitting on the sea. During migration, they can actually just go straight down to South America almost non-stop. I don't know the details, but one bird that was ringed on a colony in Wales was retrapped some 10 or 14 days later in Argentina or Brazil, just showing how quickly they can go down there. Now, most nights they will probably rest. Some birds don't tend to fly during the night. They will what's called raft up at night, and they do that before coming to the colonies as well. But very good question. And one more before I go. Kate Fox, do they return to their natal island to breed, or do they go to other islands? Another great question, actually. It seems that a lot of them do return to their natal island. So they are highly, what's called site, they've got high site fidelity. So they come back to the same place that they were hatched up on. There's not much evidence that birds will return to different colonies or take up residence in different colonies all around the UK. It's quite interesting. Whereas you will regularly catch chicks that you ringed in the nest back on the same island, in the same place, on the same area of that island, the following 3 or 4 years later when they return to their colonies to start looking for a mate. So it doesn't seem like they go to many other colonies. But yeah, fantastic. Thanks for those questions. That was really great. I have run over by a few minutes. I could talk about Manx shearwaters and seabirds all day, all night. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much for coming and listening, and thanks to Lizzie for inviting me on to give this short lesson. Check out all the lessons that are to come, the whole fantastic selection, and have a look at the ones that have already been as well. Brilliant resource. And thank you everyone once again. Take care and stay safe out there. Cheers.